In 1803, the United States pulled off the single greatest real estate deal in history. For a mere $15 million, President Thomas Jefferson didn't just buy a port, he bought an empire, doubling the size of the young nation almost overnight. The price tag worked out to less than 3 cents an acre for 828,000 square miles of territory. But this incredible transaction, which set the stage for America's continental destiny, almost never happened. It was a deal born from a string of secret negotiations, sheer desperation, and a slave rebellion that shattered the ambitions of Napoleon Bonaparte. At the dawn of the 19th century, the United States was a young country, mostly huddled along the Atlantic coast. But a new generation of Americans was already pushing west, over the Appalachian Mountains and into the rich river valleys beyond. These pioneers were tough, but they had an Achilles heel. Their entire economic survival depended on one thing: the mighty Mississippi River. Since traveling overland was brutally slow and expensive, the river was the only real highway for farmers to get their crops to market. They'd float their goods down the Mississippi to the vital port of New Orleans, where everything could be loaded onto ships bound for the East Coast and Europe. Whoever controlled New Orleans controlled the economic life of half the country. For years, that power was Spain. It wasn't perfect, but a 1795 treaty gave Americans the right to use the port, which kept things stable. Spain was a fading empire, and Jefferson felt they could hold the territory quietly for years. But in 1801, a rumor started swirling in Washington, D.C., that sent a chill down everyone's spine. A secret deal had been made. Spain was giving Louisiana back to its original owner, France. The thought of the ambitious and unpredictable Napoleon Bonaparte controlling America's lifeline was a strategic nightmare. Napoleon wasn't interested in quiet stability. He had grand dreams of rebuilding a French empire in North America. He saw Louisiana as the personal breadbasket for France's crown jewel sugar colony, Saint-Domingue, what we now know as Haiti. Then, in 1802, the situation boiled over. Following French orders, Spanish officials in New Orleans suddenly canceled America's right to deposit goods in the port. The economic highway was closed. Outrage exploded across the American frontier. Many, especially Jefferson's political opponents, began calling for war. Jefferson, a man who hated the idea of war, knew he had to do something, and fast. With France in New Orleans, he wrote, they become America's natural and habitual enemy. He even warned that the moment France takes possession of the port is the day that we must marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation. Allying with their former colonial masters was a horrifying thought, but Napoleon's threat was so serious that every option had to be on the table. Jefferson couldn't risk a war, but he couldn't let Napoleon choke the life out of the American West. He needed a diplomatic miracle. President Jefferson's initial plan was actually pretty modest. He got Congress to approve $2 million and sent his man in Paris, Robert Livingston, with a simple mission: try to buy the city of New Orleans. Jefferson authorized him to go as high as $10 million. But Livingston's efforts went nowhere. He was completely stonewalled by Napoleon's notoriously slippery foreign minister, Charles Talleyrand, who acted like he couldn't be bothered. Livingston grew frustrated, even trying to bluff that the U.S. would team up with Great Britain. Still, nothing. Back in Washington, Jefferson's anxiety was mounting. To show he meant business, he decided to send a special envoy to help Livingston. He chose James Monroe, a trusted political ally and future president. Monroe's job was to press for the purchase and be Jefferson's eyes and ears on the ground. Jefferson told him, "All eyes, all hopes, are now fixed on you. For on the event of this mission depends the future destinies of this republic." The stakes couldn't get any higher. As Monroe sailed for France in the spring of 1803, nobody could have guessed that the entire game was about to change. While the Americans were sweating it out, Napoleon's grand colonial dream was literally going up in flames. The centerpiece of his empire, the sugar colony of Saint-Domingue, was in the throes of a massive revolt. An army of formerly enslaved people, first led by the brilliant Toussaint Louverture and now by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, had fought the French to a bloody standstill. Napoleon had sent a huge army to crush the rebellion, but his soldiers were decimated by the rebels and by an even deadlier foe, yellow fever. Without the money from Saint-Domingue, Louisiana was suddenly a lot less useful to him. On top of that, another war with Great Britain was brewing, and Napoleon needed cash for his campaigns in Europe. He was a pragmatist. He knew he couldn't defend the vast Louisiana territory from the British Navy. Holding on to it was now a liability. Just days before Monroe landed in Paris, Napoleon made a jaw-dropping decision. He told his finance minister he was thinking of selling the entire Louisiana territory to the Americans. On April 11, 1803, the French minister met with a gobsmacked Robert Livingston and asked a question that would define a continent. What would America give for all of it? Livingston was stunned. His instructions were just to buy a single city. He and the newly arrived Monroe had absolutely no authority to buy an area that would double the size of their country, but they knew this was an opportunity that might never come again. Fearing Napoleon would change his mind, they jumped into frantic negotiations. On April 30, 1803, they struck a deal for $15 million, with the final treaty being signed just 2 days later, but backdated to the 30th. After it was done, Livingston reportedly said, "We have lived long, but this is the noblest work of our whole lives." News of the deal hit Washington on July 3, 1803, and was announced to a roaring public on the 4th of July. Talk about perfect timing. But behind closed doors, Jefferson was having a full-blown constitutional crisis. As a strict constructionist, he believed the government could only do what the Constitution specifically said it could do. And nowhere did it say a president could buy foreign land. He was genuinely worried this would set a dangerous precedent for presidential power. He even drafted a constitutional amendment to make it legal. But his advisors basically told him there was no time. Napoleon could back out at any moment. They argued the president's power to make treaties was all the authority he needed. Reluctantly, Jefferson set his doubts aside, deciding the good for the nation was just too great to pass up. He pushed the Senate to approve it, and they did. On December 20th, 1803, the French flag was lowered in New Orleans, and the Stars and Stripes were raised. The United States had officially taken possession of 827,000 square miles of new territory. Even before the ink was dry, Jefferson had already tasked a team with exploring his new purchase. This became the legendary Lewis and Clark expedition, sent to map this vast, unknown land and its people. If you're finding this slice of history fascinating and want to learn more about the pivotal moments that shaped the world, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the past. The Louisiana Purchase was, without a doubt, a massive win for Jefferson. It kicked a major European power off America's western border and secured the Mississippi River for good, paving the way for a century of incredible growth. It captured the public's imagination and fueled the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to control the continent. But this triumphant story of American expansion has a dark and often ignored side. The deal was made between two governments that completely disregarded the fact that tens of thousands of Native Americans already lived on that land. The purchase wasn't of empty territory, but of the imperial right to take that land from its original inhabitants, by treaty or by force. For the native peoples, the Louisiana Purchase wasn't a bargain. It was the beginning of a long nightmare. The century that followed was filled with broken treaties, forced removals like the Trail of Tears, and the systematic destruction of their way of life. The purchase also poured fuel on the fire of America's most toxic issue, slavery. Every time a new territory carved out of the purchase applied for statehood, a vicious political fight erupted over whether it would be a free state or a slave state. These conflicts drove the nation further and further apart, leading directly to the Civil War. The Louisiana Purchase was so much more than a simple real estate deal. It was a high-stakes diplomatic gamble, a constitutional crisis, and a turning point that forever shaped America's identity. It was an opportunity born from a European war that allowed a young nation to chase its continental dream. This single deal secured America's future as a world power, but it also unleashed forces of incredible growth and unimaginable suffering, a complex legacy that America still reckons with today.